Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
So James Wesley Rawles joins us to talk about this. We have the demonization with shows like, preppers. One of the prepper guys refused a procedure by a doctor. That's an article on Infowars.com. Had all his guns taken. They said by not taking the procedure, it means you don't care about your life. Prima facie evidence that you're suicidal. The guy's like, no, I just don't want tubes stuck in my chest. And so he's home, healthy. And they just say, no guns ever again. No judge, no jury. And you got to know, most of your doctors are spying on you now. That's on record. Most of the preachers are. We're living in the transition from a free republic into the Soviet globalist model. And I say Soviet because that's what they call it. It's not even communist. It's a corporate fascist system through Soviet boards. Soviet just means boards or committees. Agenda 21, that's what the UN model is. The EU's based on the Soviet model. The bankers gave the commies, and our government funded the commies in 1917 on record. Now, here's the article. Prepper declared mentally defective, put on FBI list. There's that report. David Sardi barred from purchasing guns after a doctor reported him to authorities. Now we go now to James Wesley Rawles. James, I'm kind of ranting here as I introduce you, but what woke you up? What makes you tick? Who is the man, best-selling author, James Wesley Rawles? And how did you write a book? I didn't even check the date. Was it a decade ago or so? Patriots that literally reads now like a history book because so much of it has happened.
Well, Alex, I'm a former Army intelligence officer, and I actually wrote the first draft of Patriots back in the winter of 1990, 1991. And it's a classic socioeconomic collapse novel about hyperinflation, followed by a total collapse of society where the power grid goes down and there's massive depopulation of the major cities and lawlessness all over the country. I wrote that because I see it's actually a possibility. We live in a very fragile society with very long chains of supply, great dependence on technology, tremendous dependence upon the power grid. And if the grid were to go down for any number of different reasons, all bets are off.
Wow. So, again, it's been so many years since I read that first book, and I'm one of these talk show hosts that just gets somebody on and does my research live. But I'd forgotten, you were Army intelligence, so but even back in 91, you recognized this New World Order threat, and you wrote about it. How did you discover this? I mean, did you discover this when you were in Army intelligence, or what woke you up?
Yes. What woke me up, well, to begin with, my upbringing was preparedness-minded from the very beginning, because I came from a pioneer family that had come out west by covered wagon in the 1850s. So I still had that spirit alive in me. I also grew up in Livermore, California, the son of a physicist that worked at Lawrence Laboratories. And Livermore has one of the highest per capita number of bomb shelters in the country. There's a very high recognition of the nuclear threat there, because they designed nuclear weapons in Livermore. So between the two of those, I was already pretty well primed for the preparedness mindset. And then going into Army intelligence, I was involved with, among other things, some country studies looking at the fragility of some nations. And I came to realize that our own nation was even more fragile, because we have a higher level of technological dependence. We have tremendously long chains of supply. And in recent years, we've adopted the Japanese Kanban school of inventory control, what they call just-in-time inventory, or lean inventory control, where there's very little in the pipeline at any given time. And what you see on your supermarket shelves is basically all they have. There is no longer a back room with extra stock. What you see is what you get. And if the inventory control system breaks down for any number of different reasons, whether it's a transportation problem or a communications problem or just an internet problem, you're out of luck.
So we're 3 days from No food on the shelves in the studies I've seen from the Army, which I guess you were probably involved in. You can elaborate. 10 days from anarchy, 15 days from cannibalism.
About that, yeah. In fact, there's a bit of cannibalism described in my first novel. And when you come right down to it, human nature is pretty ugly. If you remove the trappings of modern society and law and order, there's just a thin veneer of civilization. And when you peel that back, what's underneath is kind of ugly. It doesn't take long at all before people revert to savagery. And that's one of the central themes of all of my writings. So that's why I encourage people to move to lightly populated areas and to team up with like-minded folks and to stock up in depth.
Well, you know, the media, the controlled corporate media and the globalist media, the occupied America media, they always demonize being prepared. But as you were pointing out, government itself and people that work in intelligence are obsessed with it now more than ever. And all the big money I know is leaving the United States, racing to mountainous areas, racing to islands. And even the news is reporting that. But we're still bad for being concerned.
Right. In fact, our government is essentially schizophrenic on the issue of preparedness. Because on the one hand, you've got the Department of Homeland Security labeling people who prepare as potential terrorists. At the same time, you've got FEMA encouraging everyone to stock up. So who do you listen to?
Oh, man. Now, I mean, you talk about the New World Order in your book that you're now saying you wrote 20 years ago. I guess I read it when it was republished, 11 years ago or so. Now world government is out in the open. I mean, you just type world government into a search engine. It's being announced by them every day, by the very mega banks. How did you wake up to the whole global government system? What's your political views on that?
Well, I've always been a conservative. I was a John Bircher in the 1970s, late 70s is when I got involved with the John Birch Society and woke up to the whole globalist threat. And I still, although I don't have a really strongly conspiratorial view like some others, I do believe that we do have the threat of global governance. And the natural reaction of governments when there is a power vacuum or disruption is to clamp the lid down and institute total government. That's the very nature of government. And if there are risks out there that would cause major disruption, people have to be prepared not just for defending their own family home and providing for themselves, but also the prospect of waking up some morning and finding yourself under martial law. And the other thing that I stress in my writings is it's only the people that are well prepared that are going to be in a position to do anything about it. Everybody else is going to be worried about where they're going to find their next meal. So by stocking up, you can be part of the solution.
Well, James, people ask me, Alex, do you really believe all this you're talking about? I've moved to the country. I got an 8-foot stone wall, and around the back of the farm property, I got a big game fence with barbed wire on it. And I've got food and I got guns, and if stuff does start unraveling and unfolding, anybody trying to take what I got is dead. And people are like, ooh, that's radical. No, that's just normal human nature. You talk about frontiers, that's where I come from. Most Americans, I feel sorry, I have that in their roots. But most Americans now, 90%, as you know, live in cities and are not self-sufficient. Of the 10% that are rural, I've seen numbers of only half being sufficient.
That's right.
And this is totally creepy because I've seen university numbers of 7 million dying of illnesses or malnutrition associated with the Depression, 7 million in a decade, and that 90% were rural then, or about 87%, and about half of those were self-sufficient. So we're looking at 45% that were self-sufficient then, 7 million dead. Imagine what's going to happen this time.
And that's with the power grid staying up. If the power grid goes down, all bets are off. If you look back at the Depression of the 1930s, you had a lot more people that were more closely connected to the land. Now we've got 2% of the population feeding the other 98%, literally. So if we were to see a grid-down societal collapse, most people don't have country cousins that they can depend on anymore. And the chains of supply are so long that we could see a massive depopulation. And if this were to happen, say, in the fall of the year, with power grid going down, if the grid didn't come back up quickly, by the next spring, we could see half of the population of the United States dead.
I want to go over those numbers with you. Best-selling author of fiction and nonfiction books, James Wesley Rawles is our guest. Survivors, a novel of the coming collapse, is available at Infowars.com. And then this book that we've got to carry, James Wesley Rawles, How to Survive Into the World as We Know It, available everywhere, tactics, techniques, and technologies for uncertain times. But I think more than just having food and guns and water, you need to be around, like you said, neighbors that are ready as well for mutual defense, because
absolutely.
I mean, we're talking about, I'm sure you've seen the Rockefeller Foundation award-winning movie based on the novel The Road, which from my study is very accurate with how humans would act within 15 days.
Yeah, it's kind of a bleak outlook, but yes, that is human nature at its core when you come right down to it. And that's why it is important that people team up. You need to form a neighborhood watch on steroids. You need to team up with your neighbors, like-minded friends, fellow congregants of your church, and plan. Figure out what skills exist within your group, cross-train each other, and for any skills that are missing, people need to go out and get that training and then come back and cross-train everyone else. They need to go to places like Gun Sight and Front Sight for firearms courses and come back and cross-train everyone else. You need to have at least one member of your very local community, I'm talking a cluster of houses, that is trained as an EMT or paramedic. And that's as simple as enough as joining a local volunteer fire department, and they'll give you the training free.
Yeah, even swim teams give you that. I mean, you can go to the fire department, you don't have to join usually, and they'll give free clinics on it.
Sure, yeah, they do CPR classes and everything else. It's important that people get the training to go with all this gear. I try to stress in my blog, I do a blog every day called survivalblog.com. I try to stress in my writings every day that you need more than just the gear. You need the training that goes with it. Because owning a gun doesn't make you a shooter any more than owning a surfboard makes you a surfer. There's a lot of skill that you need to acquire, and those are perishable skills.
Well, that's a good point about perishable. When I was 12 years old, literally could shoot to the same hole at 200 yards with a rifle. Now I'm lucky at 200 yards to be able to hit bullseye just because I don't have time to be shooting. I only shoot 3-4 times a year now, and you're right. We all need to constantly stay ready and also be mentally prepared. You know, think through scenarios and have defaults of what you're going to do in certain scenarios, so you're not thinking, what am I going to do as guys come climbing over your fence? You're going to have to open up on them.
If you're thinking through those problems as they happen, you're behind the power curve. You really need to plan ahead and train, prepare, lay in the logistics. And in terms of things like retreat security, you need to buy things like night vision gear and buy a Dakota Alert, which is an infrared intrusion detection system. You need to do that now, because if you wait until after a societal collapse, you think you'll be able to buy a Starlight scope on the open market? It would cost a king's ransom.
Well, there was an article yesterday I meant to get to. Guys, will you print it? I think the headline's like 40 things that Detroit's collapse tells us about our collapse. Because I want to go over some of those with our guests. Because if you look at Detroit, they had, what, a 79% increase in just the last year in justifiable homicides. I mean, this is already happening in major U.S. cities. Yeah,
if you look at Detroit as kind of a bellwether for at least urban areas, that's kind of indicative of the path that our nation is on. And that's yet another reason why I recommend moving to lightly populated farming areas. You want to be away from the metropolitan areas because that's where 99% of the problems are going to exist. There won't be rioting in small towns. There won't be looting in small towns to speak of, even if the grid goes down. But if you're in an urban or even a suburban area, watch out, because you're kind of at ground zero.
Well, don't the studies show, though, that because most people even in rural areas aren't sufficient, that within 3 to 4 to 6 months, there will start being criminal groups, but sometimes they'll be...
Yeah, there will be, but the chances of them coming to your door are statistically so much smaller out in the country. then, if you stay in the city or you stay in the suburbs, you're just another notch on the food chain.
You up? What makes you tick? Who is the man, best-selling author James Wesley Rawles? And how did you write a book? I didn't even check the date. Was it a decade ago or so? Patriots that literally reads now like a history book because so much of it has happened.
Well, Alex, I'm a former Army intelligence officer, and I actually wrote the first draft of Patriots back in the winter of 1990, 1991. And it's a classic socioeconomic collapse novel about hyperinflation, followed by a total collapse.
That's what they call it. It's not even communist. It's a corporate fascist system through Soviet boards. Soviet just means boards or committees. Agenda 21, that's what the UN model is. The EU's based on the Soviet model. The bankers gave the commies, and our government funded the commies in 1917 on record. Now, here's the article. Prepper declared mentally defective, put on FBI list. There's that report. David Sardi barred from purchasing guns after a doctor reported him to authorities. Now we go now to James Wesley Rawles. James, I'm kind of ranting here as I introduce you, but what woke? We have the demonization with shows like, preppers. One of the prepper guys refused a procedure by a doctor. That's an article on Infowars.com. Had all his guns taken. They said by not taking the procedure, it means you don't care about your life. Prima facie evidence that you're suicidal. And the guy's like, no, I just don't want tubes stuck in my chest. And so he's home healthy. And they just say, no guns ever again. No judge, no jury. And you got to know, most of your doctors are spying on you now. That's on record. Most of the preachers are. We're living in the transition from a free republic into the Soviet globalist model. And I say Soviet because that's
of society where the power grid goes down and there's massive depopulation of the major cities and lawlessness all over the country. I wrote that because I see it's actually a possibility. We live in a very fragile society with very long chains of supply, great dependence on technology, tremendous dependence upon the power grid. And if the grid were to go down for any number of different reasons, all bets are off.
Wow. So again, it's been so many years since I read that first.
Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
So James Wesley Rawles joins us to talk about this.